On today's video, I'm going to show you 3 different ways to retrieve a wacky rig. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today on this video, we're going to be talking about, how to fish the wacky rig. We're going to be showing you 3 different retrieves. These are pretty much the only 3 retrieves that I use when fishing a wacky rig. And a wacky rig, is one of the most simplistic soft plastic rigging techniques in bass fishing. It usually, involves some sort of wide gap finesse hook, but you can use just about any worm hook, and a soft plastic stick bait. That is kind of the traditional or most popular bait to use with a wacky rig, but you're usually going to be using a straight tail worm design. But the stick bait is so good because it's loaded with salt. Baits like the Zinkers, it just has a ton of salt in it, and has a nice shimmy on the fall. And it's also easy to cast too. So oftentimes when I meet somebody that wants to get into bass fishing and they just don't know where to start, this is a really good place to start. A stick bait, especially during the spring, or a wacky rig, especially during the spring, very, very easy way to just start getting out and catching some fish. So I'm going to show you 3 different retrieval techniques that I use for fishing the wacky rig, and it really all is under the umbrella of just keeping it very, very simple. As simple as it is to rig, keep it simple while fishing, because that's the beauty about the wacky rig, is its subtlety. So let's go ahead, get started. I'm going to put the chesty mount on so you guys can get a up close look as to what I'm doing with the rod and the reel and all that stuff. So let's go ahead and get started with the 3 retrieves you need to use for the wacky rig. All right, guys, so let's start off, before we talk about the retrieves, on like where you want to cast a wacky rig. You need to know exactly where to cast it and where to retrieve it to be able to get bites. And so this is a perfect scenario. This is the springtime. Fish are up and either spawning or getting ready to spawn. Not a lot of post-spawn fish. So I'm going to be targeting areas where I think that they're creating beds. That's one of the best ways to catch fish on a wacky rig. And so dock posts are really good, especially the dock posts that are closest to the shoreline. So finding a good place to cast a wacky rig, very, very important. Okay. Now, next, let's talk about the cast. Okay, one of the great things about a wacky rig is that it skips. Okay, it's got a lot of weight, it gives you a lot of momentum, so it's a great bait to learn how to skip, as long as you're using a stick bait that's loaded with salt, that's pretty heavy, like this one. And all the products are going to be in the description below that I like to use, so check the description out if you're looking for some suggestions on wacky rig gear. But essentially, I mentioned the whole skipping thing because I really do think that skipping a wacky rig versus, doing a lob cast and having it hit the surface really hard, I think is really important. That's one of the little, tips that I guess I'll throw into this video, is that if you see a good spot to cast, maybe it's like a random stick up or a stump or a dock post or something like that, making a cast like this it may spook the fish because it's landing on the water a lot harder, and you may land it on top of the fish, and that'll startle them. So I really like to skip. Okay, so learn how to skip the bait, and what that does is twofold. Number one, the final resting spot of the bait, it's gonna hit the surface a lot lighter, okay, than if it was coming straight from above and just plopping into the water. And also, as it skips across the surface, it looks like it's something that is fleeing a predator species, and so I think it kind of triggers that feeding response or that aggression response from bass by skipping it. Okay, so it's twofold. It doesn't spook the fish as much, and it kind of like allows them to know it's coming, because it's kind of skipping 20 foot or so across the surface before it finally lands, and it kind of doesn't spook the fish, it gets them excited. So how you cast it, I think, is really important. You don't have to skip it, but that is just something that if you're looking to really fine-tune your presentation, definitely experiment with skipping it, because it's a great opportunity with a Wacky Rig stick bait to do so. All right, guys, so let's go ahead, because this is a likely area and a good area to kind of demonstrate. Let's go ahead and go through these 3 different retrieval styles, and then we'll get to, you know, catching some fish, hopefully. You know, this area the other day wasn't producing, and I came back here, and so far it hasn't produced, so not sure we're going to catch a fish here, but we can move to another spot. I believe we can. But let's go ahead and just talk about the retrieves, and then we can go try them in an area that they're biting. So anyways, let's go ahead and get started. So the first retrieve is going to be the most important retrieve for a Wacky Rig. Again, what we talked about in the very beginning is that a Wacky Rig is exceptional because it has a nice kind of shimmy on the fall. You know, as this thing falls, it kind of shakes and shimmies all the way down, and that is the subtle action that attracts fish to this. So the Wacky Rig is designed to fall on its own weight and shimmy all the way down to the bottom. So that is the basic principle. So the main technique for fishing a Wacky Rig is to cast it out to a likely piece of cover, to the outside of that cover, and just let it fall on a semi-slack line. You can see here, it's already hit the bottom, but let's pretend we're in deeper water. You can see here that there's a bow in my line. I am not pulling the bait. I'm not inhibiting the action at all. I'm just letting it fall on its own weight, okay? And then I'm simply going to lift up and let it fall back down again once it hits the bottom, okay? And I may do this 2 or 3 times. I won't do it all the way back to the boat, because a Wacky Rig is a really good spot casting technique. So you're essentially going to cast to a dark spot on the water, a light spot on the water, or a visible stick up, or a dock post or something like that, and just let it fall to the bottom. Semi-slack line, keep an eye on the line. If it jumps, you know you've got a bite, and then just lift it up, reel in a little bit of slack, and let it fall back down on a slack line, semi-slack line rather. All right, that's as simple as it gets. Just a initial, let it fall on its own all the way down to the bottom. Don't do anything. Lift it up, let it do the same exact thing. Do that 2 or 3 times back to the boat, away from that cover, and that is it. That is the basic. You know, 90% of your Wacky Rig fishing, that's what you're going to do. All right, so the next technique is adding a little bit more action with the rod tip. Okay, so essentially I'm going to do the same thing, let it kind of shimmy all the way down, but instead of just straight lifting it and letting it fall back down, I'm going to go ahead and kind of shake it all the way up and then allow it to fall all the way back down to the bottom. Okay, so you're just essentially incorporating a little bit of extra action as you lift it. Okay, and very often I'll kind of like swap between just a straight lift and a pop and lift, you know, throughout the day. Okay, so you know, shaking it and then letting it fall back down, shaking it on the pull up and letting it fall back down is you know, a good way to get some strikes as well. And sometimes that'll get a strike on the way up that you just normally won't get. Okay, most of the strikes are going to be on the fall anyways. All right, so the final retrieve, again, these are very simple. Final retrieve is if I know that there is a bass on a bed or sitting next to a piece of cover, or I'm pretty sure that it's a high percentage spot and there's usually a fish on that type of thing, what I'll do, and you can maybe see, I'm not sure what you can see, but there's some rocks over here, so I'll kind of illustrate it by casting over to that rock right there where I think that there's a fish, or especially if there's a bed. So All right, so the final retrieve is one that I'm going to be using if I know there's a bed or there's a fish next to a piece of cover. You know, this is one that I'm just looking to keep the bait in the strike zone as long as possible. Usually, the fish are going to eat on the initial drop. Okay, so you don't really have to use this technique as often, but when fish get on the bed, sometimes they're a little bit more skittish. So if I know that there's a bed or there's a fish on a bed, I might cast to that location. I got a bluegill or something, you know, nipping at it right now, and all I'll do is let it hit the bottom and just lightly shake the rod tip. I'm not looking to move the bait forward at all. I'm looking to just have that thing kind of like have a very slight shake to it, so it's just lightly shaking in the same spot if possible. So like sometimes I'll hold on to the main line right above the reel and just, you know, lightly shake it to the point where I know it's not moving, you know, but it's just kind of like got this little subtle shake to it. Okay, and that is really one of the best ways to get a fish to commit, especially when they're on the bed. And usually it's just during bed season, you know. Usually if a fish isn't willing to eat, you know, right away, they're not going to stick around if you cast a bait to it. Usually the only time they're sticking around is when they're locked on the bed. So this is really only a technique you're going to be using during the bedding season. So cast it out there, let it hit the bottom, and then just shake that thing in place. Another great way to fish a wacky rig. All right, so let's go ahead and go to another area and go catch some fish using these retrieves. At least one or two of the retrieves. Let's see. Oh, dang it. Missed him. That was a classic spot to cast during the spring. There's a fish. Nice. That was just on the fall. Missed him the first time. Little buck. Yep, that was on the first technique. Just let it fall. I didn't even really get an opportunity to lift it up. So like I said, I mean, the fall is the most important part about the wacky rig. And that's classic. I mean, when the fish are starting to spawn, between the first and second set of posts, my goodness, that is a good scenario. Oh, there's a fish right there. Gosh, I was just about to bring that in. Better one. I don't even know what to call that retrieve, but that is, my goodness, look at that. That's probably a little female, potentially. Look how fat that fish is. Beautiful. Beautiful. There's fish. I saw that one on the bed. Oh, come off. That's all right. That's all right. You can see a little light spot there. I don't know if you can see it on camera. Let's see if I can put my glasses on there. Right there. That was the bed. Easy peasy. Throw a wacky rig on them. All right, guys, so that does it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it and hopefully it was helpful. The Wacky Rig is definitely one of the best and most simple techniques out there for catching bass, especially during the spring and especially when they start getting on the beds. This is one of my favorite times to throw a Wacky Rig. And so just go keep it simple. That's what the Wacky Rig's all about. Go out there and catch some fish. So if you have any questions at all, drop a comment below. Of course, we have all the links to the products that I use for wacky rigging down in the description below. And other than that, make sure you like, share, subscribe. I'm going to see you out on the water. Trust the process.